The last place I expected to find a piece of myself was in my mother-in-law's cluttered kitchen, surrounded by the ghosts of 100 family dinners and the man who was, by law and love, my brother. But life, as I've learned, has a quiet, ruthless way of correcting its own course. My name is Clara. For 8 years, I was married to David Miller, a good man, a stable man, a man who built a life with me like one assembles sturdy, unremarkable furniture. We had a beautiful home in a Chicago suburb, 2 golden retrievers who were our substitute children, and a calendar filled with social engagements that played out with the polite predictability of a waltz. David was 11 years my senior, a financial analyst with a kind smile and eyes that had long since stopped seeing me, and instead saw the comfortable, agreeable wife he'd always envisioned. Our love was a placid lake, undisturbed by great storms or great passions. I thought that was what peace felt like. I didn't know I was drowning in stillness. And then there was Ethan, David's younger brother by 8 years, the family's free spirit. He was the artist, the wanderer, the subject of hushed, worried conversations at holiday gatherings. Ethan's backpacking through Thailand. Ethan's taken a job on a fishing boat in Alaska. Ethan's sharing an apartment in Brooklyn with 5 musicians. He was a splash of vibrant, unpredictable color in the Miller's beige world, and while they loved him, they never quite understood him. To me, he was a pleasant, peripheral character in my life's story, appearing for Christmas and the occasional summer barbecue, always polite, always with a slightly distant, observant look in his hazel eyes. The change began subtly. A year ago, Ethan moved back to Chicago. He'd taken a job as a graphic designer for a small agency, a move the family heralded as him finally settling down. He started showing up for Sunday dinners more frequently. It was during one of these dinners, as I was mechanically mashing potatoes while David and his father discussed the market, that I felt a presence beside me at the kitchen counter. "You always put too much butter in those," Ethan said, his voice low so only I could hear. I jumped, nearly dropping the masher. "It's the only way they are edible," I whispered back, a defensive reflex. He leaned against the refrigerator, watching me. Not the way people usually looked at me, with expectation, or appraisal, or simple inattention. He watched like he was studying a fascinating painting. "I know," he said, a small smile playing on his lips. "That's why I like them." David and Dad would eat cardboard if it was served with respectability. A laugh, genuine and unexpected, bubbled out of me. It felt foreign in my throat. David glanced over, gave a benign smile, and returned to his conversation. Ethan didn't move. He stayed there, and we talked, not about mortgages or mutual funds, but about the strange sculpture in the new park downtown, the taste of street food in Bangkok, the way the light fell through my kitchen window at 3 in the afternoon. He spoke to me as if my thoughts mattered, as if I were a person, separate from my role as David's wife. A connection, fragile as a spider's thread, formed in that kitchen. After that, we found ourselves seeking each other out in crowded rooms. A conversation by the backyard fence. A shared eye roll across the dinner table at one of Father Miller's protracted stories. We started texting, innocently at first, a funny meme, a link to an article about an artist he thought I'd like. Then the texts grew longer, deeper. He became my secret friend, the keeper of my quiet disillusionments and my dormant dreams. I told him things I hadn't realized I'd stopped telling David, that I felt invisible, that I missed painting, a hobby abandoned after college, that sometimes the silence in our beautiful house felt heavier than any noise. David worked late most nights. Ethan, knowing this, began to stop by under thin pretenses, dropping off something his mother had left for us, borrowing a book. One rainy Thursday evening in October, he came over. David was at a conference in St. Louis. The house was a cathedral of quiet, broken only by the patter of rain against the windows. We sat in the living room, a respectable distance apart on the large sofa. We talked for hours. I don't remember about what. Words seemed to flow around us, a current that pulled us closer without a single physical movement. The air grew thick, charged with everything we weren't saying. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly, measuring out the beats of my pounding heart. At some point, I stood to make tea, just to break the tension. As I walked past him, he reached out and gently caught my wrist. His touch was electric, a current that shot straight to my core. I froze. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. Just my name. But in his mouth, it was a confession, a prayer, and a question all at once. I looked down at him. In his eyes, I saw no judgment, no expectation of Clara the wife. I saw me, the woman I'd buried under years of compromise and calm. I saw desire, raw and honest, and it mirrored the terrifying, exhilarating feeling unfurling in my own chest. "Ethan," We can't, I whispered, but my body was leaning toward his, betraying me. I know, he breathed. He didn't let go of my wrist. His thumb stroked the delicate skin there. I know exactly what we can't do, but I also know that you haven't been truly kissed in years. I can see it. Tears, hot and sudden, pricked my eyes. He saw that too. He saw everything. Don't, I pleaded, unsure what I was asking for. He stood then, slowly, still holding my wrist, closing the distance between us until I could feel the heat radiating from him. The space between our bodies hummed with forbidden potential. Just one, he murmured, his gaze dropping to my lips. One real kiss. So you remember what it feels like. So I remember what it feels like to be near someone real. Every moral, societal, and marital alarm bell was shrieking in my head. But my heart, my starved, neglected heart, was a louder, more desperate sound. It was a betrayal. I knew that with crystalline clarity. But in that moment, it felt less like betraying David and more like finally being loyal to a part of myself I had abandoned. I didn't nod. I didn't speak. I simply stopped pulling away. He took that as the answer it was. His hand released my wrist and came up to cradle my jaw, his touch unbearably tender. He gave me one last moment to refuse, his eyes searching mine. Then he leaned in. The first brush of his lips against mine was soft, a question. The second was an answer. It was not the practiced, familiar kiss of a long-term marriage. It was a discovery. It was fire and recognition. His mouth moved over mine with a desperate reverence, and I responded in kind, my hands coming up to clutch at the front of his shirt, anchoring myself to the precipice I was leaping from. This kiss held everything our conversations had whispered, the understanding, the loneliness, the fierce, forbidden attraction. It was a kiss that tasted of possibility and ruin, and for the first time in 8 years, I felt utterly, devastatingly alive. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing as if we'd run a marathon. Foreheads pressed together, we stood in the silent living room, the only sound our ragged breaths and the relentless rain. Oh, God, I whispered, the enormity of it crashing down. I had just kissed my husband's brother. In my marital home, the guilt was immediate, a nauseous wave. Ethan pulled back, his own expression a storm of conflict and wonder. Clara, you should go, I said, the words trembling. Please, Ethan, you have to go. He didn't argue. He just looked at me, memorizing my face in that moment, flushed, tear-streaked, forever changed. Then he turned, grabbed his coat, and walked out into the rain without looking back. The following weeks were a special kind of torture. David returned, and his affectionate peck on my cheek felt like a brand of my deceit. Every family gathering was an exercise in agony. The air between Ethan and me was now a live wire, humming with a secret that felt visible to everyone, though no one seemed to notice. We avoided direct eye contact, our conversations reduced to painful, stilted pleasantries. The stolen intimacy of our texts was gone, replaced by a yawning, guilty silence. But the kiss had cracked my world open. I could no longer unsee the quiet desperation of my marriage. I looked at David, at our life, and instead of seeing comfort, I saw a cage of my own careful construction. The love I had for him was real, but it was the love for a dear friend, a companion. It wasn't the all-consuming, heart-stopping feeling that a single kiss from Ethan had unleashed. The tension built like pressure before a storm. It culminated at the Millers' Thanksgiving dinner. The house was full of noise and laughter, the smell of roasted turkey and pine. I was in the kitchen, helping my mother-in-law with the gravy, feeling like an actress in a play. Ethan walked in to get more drinks. For a second, we were alone. Our eyes met, and it was like the room evaporated. The months of avoidance, of guilt, of longing, collapsed into that one glance. Without a word, he tilted his head subtly toward the back door. A minute later, I mumbled an excuse about needing air and followed him out onto the cold, dark porch. He was waiting, his breath forming clouds in the frosty air. I can't do this anymore, Clara, he said, his voice low and strained. Seeing you, pretending, it's killing me. What choice do we have? I hugged myself against the cold. He's your brother. He's my husband. Do you love him? The question was direct, brutal. I thought of David's dependable smile, his steady hands, the life we'd built. Yes, I said, and it was true. But not in the way I should. Not in the way I think I can love someone. I looked at him, my own truth tumbling out in the safety of the dark. That kiss, Ethan, that was my first real kiss. At 34. Do you understand how tragic that is? His face softened with a pain that mirrored my own. He stepped closer. It's not tragic. It's a beginning. But it can't be a secret beginning. Secrets rot everything they touch. I knew he was right. The secret was already rotting me from the inside out. The infidelity wasn't just the kiss. It was the lying, The emotional distance I was now consciously creating with David to make space for the ghost of Ethan. The decision, once made, was both terrifying and serene. I asked David to talk a few nights later. We sat in the very living room where Ethan had kissed me. I didn't tell him about the kiss. That was a burden I would carry alone, to spare him an unnecessary, specific heartbreak that would only poison his relationship with his brother forever. But I told him the truth of my heart. That I loved him, but I wasn't in love with him. That I felt more like a valued roommate than a cherished partner. That I had lost myself, and I needed to find her again, even if it meant walking away from the security and love he offered. David was devastated. He was confused. He asked if there was someone else. I looked into the eyes of the good man I had promised my life to and said, "There is no other man in the way you mean." It was the truest lie I've ever told. There was no affair, no physical betrayal beyond that one seismic kiss. But there was Ethan, his presence, the possibility of him, the way he held up a mirror to my emptiness, and that had changed everything. The divorce was amicable but deeply sad. David, ever decent, was heartbroken but not vengeful. We divided our assets with minimal fuss. I moved into a small apartment in the city, started painting again, and began the slow, painful work of rebuilding a self that wasn't defined by being someone's wife. I had no contact with Ethan during this time. It was a necessary purge. I needed to leave David for David, and for myself, not for his brother. I needed to know I could stand on my own. It was 6 months later, on a bright spring day, that I saw him. I was sitting on a bench in the Art Institute's garden, sketching. A shadow fell across my paper. "Hi, Clara." My heart stopped, then began a frantic drum against my ribs. I looked up. Ethan stood there, looking older, a little more worn, but his eyes were the same, clear, observant, and now, hopeful. "Hi, Ethan." He sat down on the bench, leaving a careful, respectful space between us. "I heard you're living in the city now." I come here sometimes to think." We talked, not as forbidden confidants or guilty secrets, but as two people who had shared a catastrophic, beautiful moment that had altered their lives. He told me he'd kept his distance out of respect for David and for my process. He told me he'd thought of me every day. "I'm not here to sweep you off your feet," he said, his gaze earnest. "What we did, the kiss, it started something, but it was born in secrecy. If anything is ever to happen between us, it has to start in the light, with honesty, with you being whole, on your own." I looked at this man, who had been the catalyst for my earthquake and who now offered not a rescue, but a respect I hadn't even had for myself. The attraction was still there, a potent, living thing, but it was no longer a frantic, forbidden pull. It was a quiet, steady current. "I am whole," I said, and for the first time, I almost believed it. "And I'm not ready